Before we begin, I have to apologize to today's guest, whose surname I mispronounced multiple times in this episode and did not realize it until after it was all recorded. I'm sorry, Natasha. You're listening to Females in Fantasy, a podcast elevating the voices of women authors of science fiction and fantasy who write about kick-ass heroines. I am your host, Brianna Da Silva, and this is Season 2, Episode 5. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you know that I've been on this sort of 6-month travel adventure thingamabob. I am now back home in my homeland of Virginia. I actually ended up cutting that travel adventure short by 2 months, so it only lasted 4 months. But yeah, if you want to know more about that, kind of some of the lessons that I learned while traveling, some of the mistakes I made, why I had to go home early, I write about that over on my blog at briannadasilva.blog. But more excitingly, today on the podcast, we are talking with Natasha Ngan, author of the upcoming Asian-inspired fantasy novel, Girls of Paper and Fire. Now, this book has quite a bit of hype going on in the book community, especially the YA book community, and I know I myself am really excited to read it. If you're listening to this episode the day that it comes out, you only have 5 days left to wait until Girls of Paper and Fire comes out. But yeah, so she and I are going to be talking about a lot of things related to her book, including writing diverse fantasy and an interesting thing that I don't see covered a lot, which is the idea that female characters written in patriarchal fantasy worlds can be just as empowering as showing them in egalitarian worlds. So yeah, that's something that's really interesting to think about. A quick trigger warning, we do talk in broad terms about sexual assault and why that is a relevant topic for teenage readers. That trigger warning definitely applies to her book as well. Her book very much deals with that kind of a topic. In this interview, we only talk in broad terms. We don't really go into specifics, but still just be aware that we do touch on that topic. One more thing before we get into her interview, just letting you know that you are going to want to stay till the end of the episode. I am giving away a free copy of her book, a free copy of Girls of Paper and Fire. So you'll want to listen till the end so you can know how to get in on that giveaway. All right, without further ado, here is my conversation with Natasha. Welcome, Natasha, to Females in Fantasy. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me all the way from Paris.
Yeah, we were like so far away. We were just talking about this before we started recording. I'm currently in Colorado and you are in Paris, and it is later in the day for you and it is early morning for me. So time zones are weird, but it's really cool that we can still just have this conversation.
Yeah.
Technology is awesome. All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing.
So very cliche sort of story. I've always been a writer. I just have always loved reading. It was one of those things that I never really thought of as a career, and I never really thought it was possible. And now I look back, I can kind of see why I thought that as I was growing up, because my mum was quite a tiger mum. She's a lovely Chinese lady, but she was very much, got to think about your career, and an author was not a career to her, and it was never suggested in school, anything creative really. So I never really thought it could be something I could do, but it was just the one thing that I couldn't not do, to write. So yeah, I was always written. When I was young, I would write on the back of envelopes and whatever little scraps of piece of paper I can get, and I wrote my first book when I graduated university, and that became the first book I got published in the UK.
That is awesome. And remind us again remind me, because I can't remember what your first book was.
It's so long ago, it feels like another lifetime. That was The Elites, and it was a sci-fi book.
Okay. Yeah, so it's cool. So you have, is it 3 books out now? Well, including the one that's about to come out? Or
Yeah. And Girls is my first in the US, yeah.
Okay, cool. So tell us about the newest one. Give us like a little bit of an elevator pitch and the inspiration, like what inspired you to write it?
Sure. So Girls is set in this Asian-inspired fantasy world where a demon king takes 8 human concubines, or 8 human girls as his concubines every year, and it is essentially a love story between 2 of these concubines. And what inspired me was, I don't know, I feel like Girls is just the book I've always had inside me, and I never really knew how to write or whether I could write it. And I came to the end of my contract for my first 2 books, which was a 2-book contract. And I'd written another book and my publishers weren't interested. And I was having a bit of a tough time, really, because my first 2 books hadn't really sold well. And it was difficult to sort of know whether I could keep writing, whether I would keep getting books published. And I think that at the same time, while that was difficult, it gave me a level of freedom to just be like, okay, I'm gonna write this dream book then about my queer Asian concubines, and damn it, like, we'll see what happens. And but it's just so filled with me and my authentic experience and viewpoints and ideas, and I'm so excited about it.
So it sounds like a passion project.
Yes, definitely. I say Asian inspired fantasy. That's kind of the easiest way to explain it, but there's just so much under that, right? And I feel like it's such a shame because we're not really at a place where, well, we are, I guess, but it's difficult to say very specifically within that category what Girls is, because I feel like we're still building that category of just Asian inspired worlds. And so everything kind of gets lumped together. And now we're having more and more of these diverse fantasies. It's becoming easier to distinguish between them and for people to step up and say, mine is from a diaspora experience as Southeast Asian or whatever, living in America, let's say, and then another person is a mainland Chinese, and it's very much a historical Chinese. And so for me, Girls is very much a mix of cultural influences, because that's always been my experience. I'm half Chinese, half English, but my mum and her family are from Malaysia. So being Chinese Malaysian is very different from being mainland Chinese. And I've lived between the 2 countries. And so I have this whole sort of mix of experiences, which I brought to the world building of Girls.
That's really interesting. So if we're gonna play the categorization game, there's so many different like descriptions of fantasy even that exist already within like all these different like subgenres and whatnot. And some of them would be like high fantasy versus low fantasy, or like epic fantasy. Would you say that your book falls into any of those kind of categories? And if so, how?
For sure. I have to say I'm not super clued up on all the exact differences. I would probably, so most people call it the high fantasy, I think, just because it is this entirely new world that everything sort of, it is roughly based on historical things and obviously real life cultures, but it is this new land. So I guess that, but if anyone else has a better way of explaining it to me, that's good.
Okay, cool. So is an interesting thing where, as you're talking about, we're getting a lot more of like diverse fantasy that's coming out, but there still has been like, for the very longest time, there's dominance of the Eurocentric fantasy, right?
Oh, for sure.
Where like,
yes.
if people like, I mean, to the point still where I think when people hear the word fantasy, they're still, or epic fantasy or high fantasy, whatever, like the first associations that come to mind are like Tolkien-esque,
definitely.
like blonde farm boy riding off on a European style dragon.
Yeah. Western medieval kind of fantasy,
yeah. So why do you think it is that has been the association for so long, and why is it that only now we're starting to see like more of these other sources of inspiration for fantasy are becoming more popular? Like, what's your personal take on that?
Yeah, I guess that's it's probably because those have been the dominant voices. It's been white and often male writers, and so that is their experience, and I guess their exposure to certain myths in the West, with the Arthurian myths, for example, which seem to influence so many sort of medieval fantasies. And yeah, like, Lord of the Rings is just such a kind of staple, and everything seems to float around it in a way and be kind of attracted to that. But for me, growing up, it was actually a very different story, because while I had those influences, I also had this whole other world of fantasy that I was exposed to living in Malaysia and watching anime, on TV, and buying anime from bookstores, and also all of our various myths and legends. And, it was just this whole other thing that influenced me along with, so I think I was lucky that I grew up with that influence as well. But I think now we're seeing this change because we are managing to, more writers of color are managing to break into publishing and to offer offer more variety of fantasy. But it's still extremely hard. And even when we went on submission with girls, it took us 1 year to sell, and we had the stories I could tell you. We just had it was really difficult to get it sold.
Yeah. So tell us about the world in Girls of Paper and Fire. How much of it is based on like some of those like mythology that you were talking about that you're exposed to and like historical sources, and versus like how much is made up? And you don't have to go like a percentage, but just kind of like tell us a little bit about like what the world building process was like for you.
For sure. I think I've always thought of these myths and legends, to me that they're more like touchstones. I love books which are retellings, or you can really feel an influence from one particular story behind that newer story. And for me, it's a bit different. I've always loved to create my own worlds and to create my own rules. So what I wanted with Girls, and what I allowed to evolve really naturally, was just kind of soaking in all of the things that I'd been exposed to when I was young, and that felt very natural to me. And I felt like I had some level of connection with, to kind of give me not authority to write it, but just that personal experience. I had a reason why I wanted to write this kind of story, and it was because they meant something to me and they influenced me growing up. So the world is very much its own thing, but it should feel familiar to people maybe who've had similar experiences. And I've had lots of Malaysian readers, for example, who've told me like, I can see all the Malaysian references, and like especially with the food and things like that. And and other people might spot something that links to a certain myth or something like that, like Journey to the West, sorry. And
Cool. I love that's like probably my favorite type of fantasy worlds, where it's just like it's a lot of new stuff, but then there's a little bit of familiarity, I really enjoy reading those.
Me too.
So in your opinion, what do you think about when people are writing about a culture that is like beyond what they're exposed to, or you might say, depending on how you want to define this, it's someone else's culture, or like drawing from one that's not your own, or like, and it's a tricky thing, right, to talk about this, because you don't want to be a gatekeeper. You don't want to say, okay, who, like, if someone is from a diaspora community, you don't want to say like, you're not really from this culture or whatever. But what do you think about that? Is there anything that should be off limits to certain kinds of people, or is it just a matter of writing things in ways that are respectful versus disrespectful? And if it's the latter, like how do you do that respectfully? What do you think about that?
I totally get that. It's so difficult, and I even felt that coming in with Girls, because it is such a mix of things, and I didn't want to feel like I just randomly threw in stuff from things that I just maybe didn't have a lot of connection with. I think it's a really difficult thing to sort of police, because everyone is very opinionated on it, and rightly so, because this is a very personal kind of topic. And I think you have to, when you're writing stories with certain representation, you have to ask yourself, why am I writing this, and what is my personal connection to this? And I think ideally you would have some personal connection to that representation in order to be writing it, because I think the real problem here is more with the industry itself, and the fact that there is such little space for diverse fiction, and so each one that comes along has a lot more to uphold and to represent, and so understandably people are going to get angry if it's not perhaps what they feel is the right representation. But I think it's important that we do have diverse fiction written by diverse writers, because for readers to see that those are stories they're familiar with, and it's written by someone who's like them, that's really powerful, especially when you're writing young adult fiction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that I think is interesting there, like some of what you're pointing out, that like a big part of that is the fact that there aren't that many diverse stories that are coming out. And maybe that would be different if that wasn't the case, but it is the case, right? And so, and so we really have to keep in mind like whose voices that it is that we are elevating, which ones we're choosing, and what kind of an impact that has.
For sure. And again, like, what is your sort of connection to this story? I mean, I cannot imagine myself writing something sort of outside my own experience culturally, let's say, just because I don't know how I would. I think I would sit uneasily with that. But for example, my boyfriend is he's half French, and he's half white French and half Martiniquean French. And so let's say it was 10 years down the line and I'd spent a lot of time with his family, and we spent a lot of time in Martinique, and I'd kind of built this personal connection to that. And I took care to write, a story came to me, and it could only be told in that world. And so I, took time to research and to speak with everyone and make sure that I was representing as well as I could. I feel like that would be when I would write it. But it's tricky.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense though. And I think it's good that we don't like oversimplify these kind of things, because it's not like there's this like cut and dry, like this really easy answer. Sometimes it is a bit complex, and that's okay.
For sure. Yeah. I think it's difficult. And I have friends who are white writers, and they write Asian inspired fantasy, for example. And I think it can be difficult from their point of view to sort of understand how hard we had to fight as writers of color to get our book about our own experience published. And I can't speak for how their journey was, but the statistics, they show that it's more difficult for writers of color. So I think that's why we have a bit of, it gets a little contentious there.
Yeah, and that's a problem we need to solve. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about like gender in fantasy worlds, because I've talked to some fantasy authors that like to write like power fantasies that have where there's like no gender hierarchies at all in their world, because it's like empowering to them, because they're like, oh, I'm the world maker, I can do whatever I want. But then there are others that like to write the opposite, where they'll write about girls and women like standing up and finding power in a world that's set against them. Maybe that's because that's a little bit more relatable in some ways, but I know I can see that like both kinds of fantasies can be powerful for different reasons. So in your world, which of those categories does it kind of fall into, and like what was your decision behind doing it in that way?
I think anyone who read girls will know it's definitely the second kind. It's definitely it's a patriarchal system, and it's girls raging against that and trying to find their place within that and change their place within that. And I absolutely love stories as well that take us outside of that, because, oh God, especially at the moment, we could all use a bit of a break from the patriarchy. But for me, again, I think it comes down to what I was saying about writing about things that I have a personal connection with, and I have very, 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 very strong feelings about the topics in Girls, especially. It is a book about sexual abuse and trauma and surviving trauma of a sexual kind specifically. And I think there is a way to write that in a non-patriarchal world, but it was also a little bit of a rage book. I was kind of, I am a sexual abuse survivor, as sadly many women are. And I guess I didn't realize at the time, but I really was exploring a lot of those feelings. And to me, my experience has been within that system. So I wanted to write Lay and the other girls' experience from within a system that was similar to ours, but give them more agency and more power than perhaps I feel like I have within our system, our real world system. So it wasn't a conscious decision. And I'm just doing book 2 at the moment, and there is actually a matriarchy, and it's been so fun to write that. And that has felt really empowering as well. So I totally get why. And we need both, definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But I think to frame the whole sort of narrative around trauma, it really had to come from a place of realism.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are your thoughts about like, how would I phrase this? So some people, this is a little bit of a contentious thing too. There's some opinions out there about like what should and shouldn't be in young adult fiction, for teenagers. And you have people saying that like, hey, teenagers can handle anything. And then there are others that are like, yeah, but there's some things that you have to do in a certain way for a certain age. And I don't know, I think I'm kind of like a little bit in the middle where I feel like teenagers can handle anything, but then there's like, there are ways to do it that maybe, but I don't know.
Sure.
So what do you think about that? And then what was your kind of like approach with writing something as serious as, sexual assault and things like that in a fantasy world that's for youngish teenagers, which teenagers are mature and they can handle a lot. But yeah, so what was your approach for that?
I think it just comes down to the fact that there's no age restrictions on violence, on sexual assault. The real world does not play as nicely as we can in books, let's say. So while we could police what young people are exposed to through books, we can't police what they're exposed to in real life. And yeah. I wrote girls for, it's not just for young girls who've gone through similar things to the characters, but that was one of the readers that I had in mind, because I was essentially writing this book for myself. And for me, I've really discovered, sometimes when things happen to me, I struggle to talk about it, and through books and through seeing how other characters and other people have kind of processed things and handled things and how they've grown and developed, and that's really helped me sort of have my own narrative around what's happened to me. It's an unspoken one, and especially with sexual assault, often we're not ready to speak about it. And I feel like books can be safe places where we can explore different reactions to that, and to show that there's not one right way to react. In the book, you'll see like the girls will react in different ways, and there isn't one right way. And if it just acts as maybe for one reader a place where they might recognize a little something in themselves in the book, in one of the characters, and that helps them process their own trauma. And I've had a couple of messages like that from people, from readers, who told me that it did, and that it just meant the world to me. And so essentially that was what I was doing for myself through writing Girls. But more generally, what I think in terms of content is that I do believe that it is good to have trigger warnings and to have a discourse around books so people are aware what's inside it. And yes, for sure, like if you do not want to read about sexual assault, and God, I can understand that you might really not want to, then yeah, Girls is not the book for you. I think I've had this discussion with my agent, with my editor, and I think Girls would have been an easier book and maybe a more commercial one if there wasn't this narrative around sexual trauma. But I don't think it would have been as empowering or as impactful to certain readers. And so I didn't want to lose that, because ultimately that was the core of the story, and that was something that I wanted to explore and put out there for readers. Because like I said, unfortunately, young people do get exposed to these kinds of issues, whether it's them experiencing sexual abuse, whether they're seeing it, it happen to someone else, whether they're hearing about it, whether people are talking about it at school. And I remember all of that stuff in school as I was growing up. And I think if I could have explored that through a book where I could take my time and I could think about it, and we could be a bit more careful about how things were said than just like some playground chatter, that would have helped me. But by means, like, definitely, I think readers should decide what is good for them and at what certain time they want to read something. And that's why we do have a trigger warning in Girls. And I've been open talking about what it contains and haven't wanted to shy away from that.
Yeah, I agree with all that. It's definitely true that unfortunately, even if you try to shield a teenager, from certain things, like you can't. So many of these things are already on young people's minds. They're already, things that they're talking about and thinking about, and things that affect their lives. So yeah, I agree with everything that you said.
For sure.
Yeah. So. Okay, last question. What do you wish to see more of with how women are portrayed in fantasy stories? It's a kind of open-ended one, but yeah, answer that however you want.
Yeah. I think, again, it just comes down to, I just love to see more diversity. And I think in terms of, for women in particular, female characters, just diversity in what strength means and what that looks like, and all the different problems that different women might have and how they respond in various ways to the same thing. Because I feel like we have this sort of archetypal strong female character, like a Katniss, and she's fantastic and empowering, and we definitely should have characters like that. But we should also have the quieter characters, the characters who are very unsure of themselves, who are not skilled in battle, who are ordinary girls, who aren't, in fantasy as well, we have this trope of the chosen one. And I really didn't want to kind of do that in Girls. And so that's why it's not really a spoiler, I think. But Girls, the main character is a normal girl, really. So I think, that's just, I just want to know all the different stories about all the different kinds of girls, because we are varied, and it frustrates me, when we're put in boxes and we're expected to act a certain way or come across a certain way. And I love that we're getting this more, so much more variety in what female power looks like and female strength. And yeah.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. How can people keep up with you and follow you and your work?
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm on natashangan.com, just for general sort of stuff. You can send me an email through that website. And then everything else, I think I'm at Girl in the Lens. So on Twitter, on Instagram. And actually because I used to be a blogger, and so that was my blogger name, and I've kind of just kept those handles, so it's easy. But yeah, please do come and say hi or ask me any questions, and I love hearing from readers and other writers as well.
Awesome. And I'll include those links in the show notes too. People didn't quite catch them, or they want to make sure they've got the spelling right. But yeah, thank you again, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. You too. You've got the rest of your day ahead of you.
Yeah, I do. I guess you just have your
evening. Yeah.
That was my conversation with Natasha Ngan. All right, so the giveaway. If you want to enter in to get a free copy of Girls of Paper and Fire, here's what you can do. Head on over to the Females in Fantasy Facebook page. So you can go to facebook.com/Females in Fantasy, or just go to Facebook and search for Females in Fantasy. Whatever works. And when you go onto the page, you will see some things on the side. It'll be like home, posts, about, whatever. And you'll see a link for giveaway. So click on that, and you will see lots of different ways that you can enter into the giveaway. You can do multiple things, and such as posting about it on Facebook, or tweeting about it, or following Natasha on Twitter. The more you do, the greater your odds are of winning the giveaway. And I'm going to let you know, if you're a patron, you automatically are much more likely to win if you enter and if you claim those benefits. So you'll get an extra, I think, 5 points or something if you're a patron, just so you know. And if you were maybe thinking about becoming a patron, but you've been undecided, and maybe this is what's going to push you over the edge to get those nice benefits, head on over to patreon.com/Females in Fantasy if you want to get in on that. So yeah, again, the giveaway is on the Facebook page for Females in Fantasy. I will also include a direct link to it in the show notes if that's easier for you. And it ends on November 8th, so make sure you enter before then. Also, some of the things you can do multiple times, like I think you can share about it like online on social media. I think you can do that more than once. But yeah, and so that ends 2 days after her book comes out. If you want to guarantee that you get Girls of Paper and Fire right when it comes out, then you're going to want to go and pre-order it. So you can go and pre-order it on all the places. And remember that pre-ordering really helps authors. It really helps their books to come higher up on the charts and all those things. So pre-order it if you can. Next time on the show, we will be having Tasha Suri to talk about her upcoming South Asian-inspired fantasy book, Empire of Sand. That's the danger with listening to this podcast. As I say, you will keep learning about new books that you want to read. It is dangerous for your TBR list. Make sure you are subscribed to the Females in Fantasy podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to help the podcast grow, please rate and review it on iTunes. That really helps a lot. If you have questions, comments, or just want to say hi, you can reach out to me on Twitter or Facebook, or send me a direct email at femalesinfantasy@gmail.com. Until next time, this has been the Females in Fantasy podcast. I am Brianna Da Silva. Thanks for listening.